And trying to find where I put them from Mr. Shields.
Yes.
I understand you've been working with him. So to the degree there's anything in that response you'd like to touch on to, please do so.
Yes, certainly. I provided Mr. Shields with a technical note, which addressed about 5 or so of the questions put to him when he was on the stand. Has that been appended in full to the response? I haven't seen what has been lodged with the panel.
Well,
Yes.
yeah.
It has? Okay, that's really helpful. I have got a copy of that here and I'm happy to work through that.
Thank you.
It's absolutely fine.
We'll see where we get to. Let's start with the summary, but it could be useful just for those questions too, just briefly the ones you helped with.
Yep, certainly.
You.
Are you happy for me to read the summary in full?
Yes, in full's fine. You don't need to read your full name as, etc. Just from 2.
Paragraph 2?
Yes,
Certainly.
thank you.
I acknowledge that signalising State Highway 6 Stalker Road, State Highway 6 Howards Drive and the urbanisation of the State Highway 6 corridor in keeping with a 60 km/h environment has been discussed extensively through conferencing, and there is general support for these across both urban design and traffic experts. Whilst the matter of implementing changes in speed limits is one for Pūtahi as the road controlling authority, I am comfortable that there are mechanisms in place to urbanise the corridor and enable upgrades to signals to be delivered. This includes consideration of design treatments to manage speeds, such as threshold treatments and raised intersections, which can be addressed at later design stages. I further understand from discussions with Mr. Shields that Council are intending to add provisions to the plan variation addressing my concerns about the delivery of Stalker Road bus priority, so that's a bus lane, and the NZ Up package to the west of Shotover Bridge prior to development on the site. At the time of preparing the summary statement, I have not seen this included in provisions. The last set of provisions I've seen were dated 27th of November,
Yes.
So that's what my summary is based on. I remain concerned about how the current set of provisions address the delivery of infrastructure. The key provisions as they relate to various activities and land areas in the plan variation area are 49.510, which is the low density precincts, 49.533, addressing medium and high density, 49.550, that's Glen Panel and commercial precincts, and the open space precinct 49.556. The staging provisions list infrastructure upgrades that must be delivered prior to the development of the precincts to which the specific planning provision corresponds. I've prepared a table to capture the infrastructure to be delivered under each provision and for each precinct, which you'll see there is Table 1. This will be relevant in a couple of paragraphs' time, but you'll see I've actually put them together as packages, a Western, Central and Eastern package within that table as well. So that's my interpretation of the provisions as at 27th of November. These provisions require only those upgrades to be delivered that are in proximity to the land area without considering upstream or downstream traffic movements and the dependencies between the areas. This is illustrated in the following diagram where I packaged together the works in the vicinity of the 3 key access intersections. And which each of those 3 packages that you see there, which I've labelled 2, 3 and 4, each of those has a set of bus stops, it has a pedestrian crossing and it has an intersection upgrade. So there are 3 line items in the provisions for each of those 3 proximities in the plan variation site. It is evident there are some errors in the planning provisions which I have highlighted in Table 1. Specifically, the upgrade to Stalker Road intersection should be changed to Howards Drive for areas D and J. D and J are clearly in proximity to Howards Drive to be consistent. I expect that's just an oversight. 2.7. My primary concern is that if only some, but not all of the infrastructure is implemented prior to substantial development, the bottlenecks in the transport network may not be addressed. For example, if areas C through G and J, so that's in proximity, the land holdings in proximity to Howards Drive and to where the eastern intersection is proposed, were to be developed with associated package 3 and 4 upgrades, the current morning peak network bottleneck at the Stalker Road intersection, which is addressed through package 2, is not required to be addressed under the provisions. If the development were to occur, starting at the west and then moving to the east, this problem would not materialise because the upgrades would happen, the initial upgrade would be where the bottleneck is. However, I am unaware of any planning provisions that require the westernmost precincts and infrastructure to be established before the easternmost precincts and infrastructure. To address this, I have provided an alternative version of Table 1 below, which ensures that the appropriate downstream infrastructure is in place prior to development. The resultant Table 2 also includes the Stalker Road bus lane and the New Zealand Upgrade Programme infrastructure to the west of the Shotover Bridge. I consider that the planning provisions relating to development staging and infrastructure would be more helpfully presented in the plan variation as a table much like the above, or with clear direction around the sequencing of development and dependencies in terms of infrastructure responses. I further iterate from my primary evidence that I recommend the provisions be amended as far as practicable to provide for regular traffic monitoring to be undertaken to measure the success of the various initiatives aimed at reducing reliance on private vehicle travel, the implementation of effective and ongoing travel planning, including regular monitoring, be integrated into the Transport Interventions Plan, and for the preparation of an integrated transport assessment for all resource consent applications on the site. This should, in my view, be included in the planning provisions, including to address the potential impacts of residential development preceding commercial development and addressing the cumulative effects of development on the planned variation site. And if I can just elaborate a little bit further on that, from my perspective, the transport assessment that has been presented is essentially a cumulative effects assessment. It looks at the entire development on the planned variation site, as well as looking at all of the infrastructure that is in place. If some of that development goes ahead in front of other development, which has the benefit of providing more amenity and more destinations on the east of the bridge, then the outcomes could be a lot worse. And similarly, if the infrastructure is not in place to be able to provide for mode shift, the outcomes are likely to be much worse than as stated. So to summarise, my view is that the infrastructure and development staging listed in Table 2 and matters raised in paragraph 2.10 are required to be addressed to provide confidence that the traffic impacts on the local and wider network can be satisfactorily managed. I'll now, in addition to the technical note that was attached to Mr. Shield's response to questions, I've also watched Mr. Shield's time on the stand and have prepared some comments and responses to some other matters that have been raised, if that's helpful to the panel.
Cool. Thank you.
I'll start with the technical note that has been included. I anticipate that you'd just like me to touch on these fairly lightly rather than read the technical note. Sound good?
Yes, thank you.
You don't want to listen to me talking all day?
Just the highlights package, from your point of view, the key matters.
Okay, lovely.
Please.
Thank you. So the first question was confirming with Mr. Smith that a 60 km/h speed limit is required for urbanisation. For me, we need to flip that around. Urbanisation is required to support a 60 km/h speed limit, and a 60 km/h speed limit For me, the motivator for that, or sorry, the reason for that is that we need to make sure we've got a safe corridor such that should signals be installed, which I believe all traffic experts are in agreement around to manage the various conflicts, if there's a side impact collision, the speed environment is actually low enough to reduce the likelihood of a fatality occurring. So there's a very helpful graph at the top of page 2 of my response taken from the Austroads Guide to Road Safety, which demonstrates the relationship between speed and the likelihood of a fatality if a collision were to occur. Clearly bring that speed environment down is good for pedestrians and cyclists as well. Feel free to, if there's any follow-up questions relating to these topics, do feel free to ask away. The second question was relating to observed growth in traffic flows. How I've addressed that is we have got several interim transport models in the current suite of models. One is a 2024 forecast year. Clearly that's not far away. I compared the number of trips in the model between 2018 and 2024, and it's the growth forecasts for 2024 are reflective of around just under 4% growth per annum. So that, in terms of how that aligns with 6% growth, we've obviously been through a pretty interesting period between 2020 and 2023 in terms of COVID and recovery. So traffic volumes, as I have observed, have fluctuated somewhat, but we are now back to having higher volumes than we had in 2020. So the 4% growth per annum, on that basis, it has got a different base year of 2018, but there is clearly provision in the model for continued and ongoing growth.
So just before you move on, Mr. Smith, so we don't have to come back to this.
Yes, certainly.
The key question that I have is whether that 4% per annum growth and your assessed or your modelled 2024 volumes, it's whether the 2023 current day volumes are in general line with that or whether they're higher or lower, and the degree of significance of that difference, if there is one.
Okay, I think it would probably be best for me to go back and do a couple of checks on that basis. And look, yeah, I'll apologise if I haven't quite got the gist of that question.
It's all right.
Great.
We're probably playing Chinese whispers with us asking Mr. Shields, who's then asked you. And
Yeah, no problem
I do
at all.
appreciate the work you've put in.
Yep. And I will acknowledge that I hadn't watched Mr. Shields' time on the stand prior to preparing this response, so I also have some more to elaborate around the schools issue very shortly. So what I would propose to do there is to interpolate the traffic volumes between 2018 and 2024, and then to compare that against 2023 traffic counts.
That would be lovely.
That would be satisfactory?
Absolutely.
Number 3, I request Mr. Smith to provide GH statistics. I have provided those for the State Highway 6 east of Lower Shotover Road count, which is one of Wakakatahi's count stations, and the closest one in proximity to the site. And there is appended a lovely long list of all of the validation sites for bedtime reading. Item 4, regarding active modes, the model is a 3-stage model. It's a vehicle driver model only. There's been no consideration of mode shift towards walking and cycling, either through the TRACS assessment or through the bespoke public transport model that WSP run.
So if I can once again just maybe interject there, the thrust of the questioning was more around a statement that Mr. Shields made that he felt that there was a significant degree of conservatism because TRACS doesn't consider, as you say, PT, that's a sort of spreadsheet plug-in, doesn't consider walking and cycling. The question I was asking him was to, I guess, probe that conservatism, because the model does use household travel survey, census data as the setup of trip-making behaviour. and therefore your sort of home-to-work type trips and the number that you attribute per household will already have a degree of that non-car-based travel mode inherent within it.
Yes, yes.
And it-
So it does, yes, it does to an extent.
Yeah.
Insofar as if the base model, if out there today we've got let's say a 1% cycle mode share from Ladies Mile into Frankton, then the inherent assumption is that when you develop these future year scenarios, you've still got that 1% mode share, albeit off a higher baseline, there's a higher level of activity. So that's as far as the assessment has gone. With continued infrastructure investment and arguably with continued frustration around traffic congestion, it's plausible that you'll get a higher number of people cycling, possibly even walking. I did it myself yesterday. And that will result in fewer trips going across the Shotover Bridge by private vehicle.
That's great. Thank you very much. I just wanted to clarify the thrust of the question because, once again, it maybe got a little lost in translation.
Yep, certainly.
Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. The last item, the technical note, relates to school trips. In terms of the mechanics of the model, the land use variables that are included in the model include for community-based jobs, including there is a column there for education jobs that comes from census. When I have forecasted, or should I say I've plugged in Ladies Mile as set out in the plan variation, I have allowed for 1 staff member per 15 students, which aligns with work I have done looking at census information and comparing it to school rolls. So I think that's pretty robust. The trip generation in the model, it isn't very sophisticated, I'll be blunt, when it comes to if you're looking to use it just to look at the impacts of a school in isolation. The reason why is that school-based home-to-school trips, let's just talk about the morning because that's really the crux of it here, are aggregated with what we call home-to-other trips, which is your recreation trips, your shopping trips, anything which is not work or business related, so any other private trips. Makes it a little bit hard to isolate things. However, I have had a wee dig around to look under the hood in terms of what's happening in the morning peak, acknowledging that there won't be many trips to shopping destinations on Ladies Mile prior to 9 in the morning. Some specifics for you: 345 inbound vehicle driver trips to the 2 schools on Ladies Mile. 21% of those trips come from Lake Hayes Estate and Shotover Country. 51% are from within Ladies Mile footprint. 16% are from the Wakatipu Basin, so that includes Arrowtown. I note that Arrowtown has a primary school, but I understand it doesn't have a secondary school, so that would be obviously a factor there. And 13%, which is 45 trips over that morning period, from the west of the Shotover Bridge. Acknowledging that not everyone necessarily is within zone, or there may be other reasons for that. So I trust that's helpful. That's vehicle driver trips only, acknowledging that the model is somewhat agnostic of walking and cycling, which would occur on top of that. Are you happy for me to address several other matters that were raised during Mr. Shields'
Yes, thank you.
questioning?
That would be helpful.
Okay. First thing I'd like to address is with respect to the NZ upgrade program, and in particular the infrastructure along State Highway 6. I've had a conversation with Mr. Sizemore from Pūtahi this morning to make sure I've got the most recent picture in terms of the delivery of that infrastructure. Stage 1 of the upgrade program includes 3 infrastructure upgrades. There's the State Highway 6A roundabout, which is going to be signalised. There is
Sorry, as an out-of-towner, is that the BP intersection?
Yep, BP
Thank
Terrace Junction, yep. which I'd suggest, from my perspective, is the biggest bottleneck in the district. There's the delivery of the Frankton bus hub, which in my view is an enabler for higher quality and more frequent public transport. So that's part of that Stage 1 package. And the much talked about State Highway 6 Howards Drive intersection is also part of that Stage 1. So those three components of what's called the Queenstown package have been designed. They've been through notice of requirement approvals, and I understand that a couple of days ago the appeal period on the notice of requirements expired, so that's good news, and there are no appeals in that regard, is my understanding. So the intention is that these will be implemented from early next year. Acknowledging they're quite large projects, it's probably going to take a couple of years to fully deliver those. So that's my understanding. In terms of other projects that sit under that Queenstown package, at this stage, Pūtahi, they are fully committed to delivering the entire package, but there's no real certainty in terms of the timing of delivery of those improvements, and also the sequencing of them as well. Now, prior to the election, National published a Transport for the Futures document, which signalled their future policy direction. That included a commitment to the Queenstown package, and my understanding is that in the first 90 days of government, they intend to release a GPS for land transport investment, and that will clearly, I think the expectation is that will include the Queenstown package. Clearly that being set into that document will provide even more certainty around that matter.
Mr. Smith, can I just ask a point of clarification?
Certainly.
With those upgrades that you've just been talking about, in terms of your Table 2, can you just help me understand which ones they refer to on these lines?
Yes, certainly.
I think it's more so the reference to Howard's Drive, to make sure I've got the right line on your table.
Okay, so my understanding is the top row, the dedicated westbound bus lane, is included.
And
None of
Sorry,
the...
in Stage 1 or the overall package?
That's the overall package, is my understanding.
yeah.
None of what I'm referring to as the Western package is included. The upgrade to State Highway 6 Howards Drive, which is the first line item under what I refer to as Central Package 2, and nothing in the Eastern package. And I have included the NZ Up package west of Shotover Bridge, which includes several signalised intersections, including Grants Road and Hawthorn Drive, most importantly, and westbound and eastbound bus lanes through to the BP intersection.
Thank you.
You're welcome. There's a question put to Mr. Shields relating to did the Queenstown Transport business cases include Ladies Mile? I was the lead transport modeller in the team that delivered the Queenstown Transport business cases, and we included 1,100 households on Ladies Mile. And that's consistent with the base model that was included in the the modelling for this particular assessment. There's also a question put to Mr. Shields, and rightly has been diverted to me, relating to why was the full NZ upgrade program to the west of the Shotover Bridge not included in the transport modelling? So the only components that were not included, and the transport modelling I'm referring to is that was provided as an appendix to Mr. Shields' primary evidence. The only improvements that were not included were the State Highway 6 grant and the State Highway 6 Hawthorn Drive signals. Bus lanes were included, and other signalised intersections further to the west were included, including 66A. The reason I didn't include these is the model is a strategic model, and it doesn't have in my view, the level of sophistication, particularly to be able to accurately model roundabouts. I will say more recent versions of the software package are a lot better, but the one that we're dealing with here in terms of the Queenstown Lakes tracks model. So the complexity of those intersections in terms of the short exit lanes, the merge behaviour that occurs, the lane configurations, it doesn't have the level of sophistication that SIDRA has as an intersection modelling package. I'm not aware of any finalised designs for the signals at those two intersections to be delivered through NZ Up. And as the model is highly conservative in terms of underrepresenting delays at the roundabouts, they are treated in the model as being, they have got some delay, traffic is crawling across the Shotover Bridge, but it doesn't have that minutiae to really represent what's actually happening as you see it on the network. So I made the call that this is inconsequential in my view, that those two signals are not coded in. So the model essentially treats those roundabouts as being able to cater for the flows, which clearly they aren't on the ground today. I observed it yesterday myself. Just one to go. Very interesting question put to Mr. Shields relating to the model again, and acknowledging that there is a tender out at the moment to have a look at what's next for models within Queenstown Lakes District. And the question as to whether it is fit for purpose. So it is a strategic model, so it is high level. Strategic models are generally used to look at the impacts of different spatial plans, different development scenarios. They're also looked at to an extent to support investment. So they have been used through the spatial plan in Queenstown. Sorry, this model has been used with the spatial plan. It was used as the foundational model for the business case work. There are a couple of more sophisticated models that are available. One is a Paramix microsimulation model, which only covers Frankton Flats. There's also a VISM microsimulation model, which covers Ladies Mile, that's been developed by WSP. Now, those two models are, being microsimulation, I don't know if how much familiarity you all have with transport models. I know one of you does. You can actually see the vehicles moving around the network. So they behave very differently to a strategic model, which looks at, here's the land use forecast. Here's how many trips are going to be generated. Here's where they're going to go on the network, and here's how they're going to route across the network, and out come your levels of service, your delays, your impacts. These look at the actual behaviour of vehicles in terms of lane changing, merging, conflict points. And through the transport business case work that we did, the level of congestion in both of these areas was such that the models themselves weren't very practical to use. You've probably seen the congestion out there today. You add more traffic in, it's going to get worse without having significant investment. So those haven't been used as part of this process because for a plan change stage, it is somewhat high level. However, this is why I asked Mr. Shields if he could do some sidra modelling of intersections both on the east side and on the west side of the Shotover River. I acknowledge he has addressed that in terms of what's on the eastern side, and that was extremely helpful to be able to confirm my concerns around continued deteriorating performance of the roundabouts and the requirement to signalise those intersections to be able to manage flows. Last thing I'll say with respect to the model being fit for purpose, I've seen some brand new shiny models in my time that are not fit for purpose. So one of the benefits of having had a model, which I believe it was developed in the mid-2000s, I've been operating it and managing it for council in Pūtahi since 2012. It gets a lot of inbuilt knowledge over from successive transport planning projects that have delivered with it. So yeah, I think it's fit for purpose. I believe that's all I had to elaborate on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. And with some of those details, I know Judith was typing away frantically beside me, but what you were reading from, do you mind just putting it in writing and just emailing it to the hearings administrator, please?
Yeah, certainly. Yep.
That would be very helpful. Just, I was trying to write too, but just to make sure we've got it all and we can ponder and reflect on it accordingly.
Certainly.
And thank you very much for the effort that you've gone to work with Mr. Shields on those questions and matters.
Yeah, my pleasure.
In relation to questions from the panel, we might start with Judith and then we'll see where the rest of us end up on it, which may not be too much for the rest of us, but we shall see. So, Judith.
Right, so in no particular order, and this tends to generally reflect the order I went through some questions with Mr. Shields. Thank you for your commentary around 60 km per hour along State Highway 6 past Ladies Mile. I understand the distinction of you actually need the urbanisation to support the 60, not the 60 to support the urbanisation. The questions I have for you are around your opinion of what might be appropriate within that corridor to assist supporting a 60 kilometre an hour speed limit, ideally in future. So there's been quite a lot of discussion, and I don't know if you followed it, with Mr. Shields and the urban designers around building setbacks. And originally in place they were up to 75 metres, then been brought down to 25 metres, and there's been some discussion around bringing them potentially further down to 10 metres, certainly at the Howards Drive State Highway 6 intersection. And I would just be really interested in your views on the implications of either a 25 metre or a 10 metre setback from a transport safety and speed environment lens.
Okay. I was anticipating this question.
I figured you might have been.
Yeah, for me, if we're talking about a distance in terms of a setback, it's not really a black and white issue to say that something is okay, something isn't. So my view is that is perhaps coming from a more of a principled sort of approach, and it's that principle of urbanisation comes with the corridor feeling like it's urban, feeling like 60 kilometres per hour is the speed that you feel comfortable travelling at. So I have touched on in my evidence the principle of self-explaining roads. So if you went out there today and slapped a 60 kilometre per hour sign along Ladies Mile, it's currently 100 kilometres per hour for much of it, and then 80 for a portion. People are just going to look at that and go, what? That makes no sense. And well, there's a can't say this for all people, but I think in general people will travel a lot faster than that 60 kilometres per hour. So for me, there will be certain things that would take place to support urbanisation. There'd be curb and channel. There would be street lighting. The main benefit of reducing the setbacks, from my perspective, is that the buildings become visible and it becomes really clear to a motorist who's passing through the area that this is an urban environment, and in an urban environment there are going to be potentially pedestrians, there's going to be cyclists, there's going to be a lot more interaction in terms of traffic from side roads. These are all things which were referred to in our joint witness statement with the urban designers as friction. So for me, if the buildings are clearly visible, then that helps to be able to support that urbanisation. I know one of the concepts that was tabled at the conferencing included a lovely row of trees on either side of the corridor, which may look nice, but it does screen the buildings. So I think that, my answer's a bit waffly, but there's a whole lot of contextual sort of stuff. It's not just about the setback; it's about the entire presentation of the corridor. My concerns with the trees, though, is that it masks the urban feel of the corridor, and then you've got things like debris and shading and all that sort of stuff, and not to mention a great big tree trunk, which if somebody veers off the road could cause a bit of damage. So. I can't really give you a definitive setback. It's more the feel of the corridor, if that's helpful.
That is, thank you, and you've anticipated my next couple of questions, which was about the trees and the avenue thereof.
I like trees, just not right beside the road.
Certainly not non-friable ones. Cover that. Yeah, sure. Yep.
We don't yet have a full picture of what the council's proposal is vis-à-vis species and frequency of planting along those setbacks, but at least some witnesses have told us big trees and quite a lot of them.
Yep.
One of the landscape witnesses also told us deciduous trees would be fabulous to allow views through to the landscape. A, just in your experience as a traffic expert, but B, in terms of specific familiarity with Waka Pūtahi, would a very high frequency of tall deciduous trees dropping leaves at certain periods of the year be something of traffic engineering interest or concern, and alternatively Waka Pūtahi's interest as an asset manager?
Well, I can only really speak for myself, not for Waka Pūtahi, clearly, so I'll get that out of the way. My concern with trees, yes, I understand that tall trees, then you can actually prune them so you can see between them, so that the masking effect to an extent can be addressed. I guess I'm more concerned from a safety perspective. Debris. Leaves on the road aren't going to cause quite so much of an issue as small branches and that sort of thing that might come down in high winds, but also acknowledging the climate here in Queenstown, the impact in terms of shading. So if you had trees on the north side of the road, you could end up with quite icy conditions. So I'm taking perhaps more of a safety sort of lens to it.
What I had in mind when I asked the question was the Murphy's Law effect of a whole huge of deciduous trees all dropping leaves at the same time on the windiest, stormy day of the year, and a blizzard of leaves just dumping on the highway, and whether that has any operational or other issues that are relevant to species selection. I can see deciduous trees helping from things like winter shadowing and icy conditions that might be a good thing to have.
Yeah, well, it's leaves are debris. They're not as dangerous as branches, but I guess the same principle applies to an extent. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Judith.
Just one question from me. You mentioned side friction and curb and channel, and is there a limitation to what you could do actually on State Highway 6? Because is it an over-dimension or large capacity route? So there's been talk about raising platforms and things, and I'm just wondering if you've got a big crane or something coming into Queenstown, would it come that way or would it detour somewhere else? And having side friction or raised platforms at the intersection. I know there are options to calm traffic, calm speed, reflect urbanisation, but would they be appropriate in this location?
My understanding it is a heavy, an oversized vehicle route. Pretty sure that's the case, although I haven't checked specifically. I can confirm that if that's helpful.
Well, it's more just your opinion if it is.
Yeah.
And please, yes, do confirm that. I think it's in the material somewhere.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've
But-
seen that, yeah.
In your opinion as a traffic engineer, does that then limit what you can actually do within the road corridor per se, the actual pavement, with curbs and channels or raised things to reflect an urban environment, and therefore make the setting it's in maybe more important to manage speed than otherwise?
There are plenty of oversized vehicle routes in urban environments. So there are design solutions. It would be factored into the design process. For example, if you've got a set of signals which may have mast arms coming across for the lanterns in the middle of the road, often they can actually be leveraged out of the way. So there are design solutions that can accommodate that. I don't see any constraint.
Thank you.
That's all right. So just want to take you to, I think it was your comment around ITAs and what you would want to see in them in relation to making sure that cumulative effects of development are assessed. And this will come back to the infrastructure provision and whether the schools are in the commercial, and I understand all those.
Yep.
I just wanted to take you to, I think it's section 29 of the district plan. Could be wrong there. So I don't know if you have a copy of the draft provisions.
I have got the copy from the 27th of November
Yeah.
in front of me. Yes, I have that now.
Apologies, I think I'm actually taking you to the wrong bit, but in chapter 29, and I think it was actually the main provisions as notified, but it's not so important about what it, the actual document, it's more the principle that in chapter 29, there is a requirement to provide integrated transportation assessments for development, and looking at the provisions, the majority of development would be restricted discretionary. It doesn't look like there's a lot of permitted housing that will go on as of right where you wouldn't need to assess effects. There was some discussion with Mr. Shields around whether or the monitoring that you'd asked for could be addressed by the cumulative effect assessment in an ITA, and whether it would be appropriate to think about amending the current provisions to include that, so that it's very clear of the expectation of information that's required for an ITA for development within the Ladies Mile variation area.
Yes.
So there's probably a little bit of homework for maybe yourself, Mr. Shields and Mr. Brown, to get your heads together. But if you could provide feedback on whether, in general, that would address your submission point, or whether, in your opinion, you think the monitoring is something that council should be doing. And we spoke with Mr. Pickard, and we understand from him that they would be undertaking general monitoring.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'd just be interested in your view in general.
Okay. I see the monitoring and the requirement for an ITA as being complementary sort of responses. I'm not sure how that should be set out in the provisions, but ideally what I would like to see is that there is that regular and ongoing monitoring that would relate to matters such as how well we're doing in terms of there's quite clear mode shift aspirations that are tied in here into the assessment. So seeing how well we are doing there. I haven't seen any planning provisions that say you must have 20% of people on buses. It just doesn't work because you can't really control that sort of thing. So we do need to have a pragmatic approach. For me, the role of monitoring is that provides a rich data set to be able to inform future ITAs. So I'm heartened to see that there is a requirement for ITAs in Chapter 29. I think this is a particularly sensitive site in terms of traffic effects. So whilst I generally like to be pragmatic, I think it's important that all applications should have an ITA, no matter how big or small, because if you don't get the infrastructure right, if you don't get the staging right, things could be particularly poor in terms of outcomes. And having the monitoring and having that information available is going to be very useful to practitioners that will be preparing those ITAs.
Okay, so can I just explore a little bit of that? So you say that an ITA for any scale of development. Can I just test that? So if you've got a small piece of land, 10-lot subdivision, high density, do you really need an ITA for that? You know, it could generate maybe 50, 100 vehicles per day if we take the old-fashioned 10 per unit approach.
Yeah, this is. I thought I might get asked that. It's where you draw the line is always the challenge, I have deep concerns about cumulative effects. We've seen what the end result is likely to look like through this assessment, but if 5 of those were to come in within a 12-month period, one after the other, then without any sort of assessment, then you're starting to talk about another 50 vehicles in the morning, and there may not be a school there may be no commercial development, there may be none of the infrastructure may be in place. So you're getting a worsening of what's basically out there today with no control over, or no assessment, of the effects. So yeah, I'm being, I guess, somewhat idealistic in my view, but that's reflective of my concerns around cumulative effects.
So just following that thought a little further, so having the regular monitoring by council, if we are looking at that little 10-lotter, it would seem a little out of scale to me to go, what is the cumulative effect of the entire development to date for a 10-lotter, 100 vehicles per day? So if council holds that body of information and somebody can actually refer back to it and go, okay, so we've currently got 15% mode share on the bus, we need 21, we're putting in 100 vehicles per day. If we take 15% of that, that'll be whatever. Does that give you more comfort if that body of information is held by council, that the assessment requirement is still captured but is much more scalable for the smaller developments? Because I'm just thinking about, if everybody has to repeat this whole thing every time. Yeah,
no, we don't want 100-page ITAs for small developments. That's completely unhelpful to anyone. Agree with those points around scalability. Look, as an industry, we don't have one source of the truth when it comes to ITA guidance. There are several documents that are floating around, and separately we've been doing some work with Pūtahi looking to refresh those and making sure that it is scalable, so you don't end up with a really comprehensive assessment where it is not warranted. So I agree with your point.
Thank you. Right. I do have some questions coming out of your summary.
Certainly.
So I think we've covered off everything I had in relation to the technical note you provided to Mr. Shields, which was very helpful, thank you. And I do appreciate all the GH statistics I asked, so that was a fair response to give me all of them.
I appreciate someone else enjoying GH statistics.
I didn't enjoy them.
That's great.
I will read, not necessarily with interest, but I will read. So we've covered off the funding piece. We've covered off that piece. Covered off that. Okay, so what I would kind of want to test with you now is around the package 2, 3 and 4 tables and your figure 1. So you've probably heard us asking questions around the what if, and as you know, we have been investigating the potential effects if there is no school by the time lots of houses have been built, if there is no commercial area and all those things, and it's something we have to take and consider very carefully and think about very seriously. And we have been investigating staging and whether it is feasible.
Yeah.
I understand the logic behind your suggestion in table 2 that essentially before anybody can develop, the Stalker Road, State Highway 6 intersection needs sorting out because that's a bottleneck. And essentially everything travelling west goes through that point. So if all of Ladies Mile has been built, other than the sub-areas that are responsible for delivering that piece,
Yep.
you have a problem. I guess what I want to test with you is if we have the bus lanes in place, we know that you need carrot and stick to create mode shift.
Mm-hmm.
If we've got the bus lanes in place, does it actually matter if cars are getting stuck on State Highway 6? Because other areas of development occurred, we still have a roundabout, but we've got bus lanes that take your PT services right to where they need to be.
There's quite a few permutations and combinations here that in the mix. The bus lane is certainly an essential piece of infrastructure. I 100% agree. The ability of that bus lane to be able to get past the congestion that's currently occurring as a result of of Stalker Road's current configuration and performance, that's there's no point in putting a bus lane in unless the bus can actually get past that to that merge point to the west of the Stalker Road roundabout, and then continue on its merry way towards Frankton. So in that essence, package 2 in particular is really, really important. Same principle applies in terms of the bus lane on Stalker Road. And it's about enabling that mode shift by making sure the infrastructure is in place. So if the bus lane delivery included some sort of a solution to be able to jump ahead of Stalker Road, I'm sure it's not going to fly over the top, but if there was some widening there to provide an additional lane, I'm not sure how that could be done safely with a roundabout, but certainly it would be well integrated with a signalised intersection solution. That would work quite well, I would have thought.
So
package 2, I'm pretty adamant that package 2 really is important in the context of that.
So just testing what you were saying there around if you can get the bus to the front of the queue, so it's not being held up in all the congestion, is it then essential in your view that Stalker Road, State Highway 6 has to be signalised before any development in Ladies Mile can essentially be occupied and underway? Or would you be comfortable that as long as the bus lanes are in and that consideration of how they can, how buses can jump the congestion, is that enough in your mind?
The signalisation of Stalker Road is important for several other reasons as well. One of my concerns with the current roundabout there, and with the potential outcome of having a roundabout installed at Howard's Drive, is that in the morning peak in particular, that's really what we're talking about in terms of effects on the east side of the Shotover. In the morning peak, vehicles coming out of Ladies Mile will get priority by turning right across and holding up traffic on the highway. and then also have priority over traffic from Shotover Country and Lake Hayes Estate. So they'll largely free flow and will exacerbate the delays for vehicles on those other approaches. And look, not everybody can jump on the bus. I wish they could. So we still need to be mindful of potentially worsening, exacerbating existing congestion irrespective. And because of the nature of those roundabouts and the conflicts that the right turners would cause, I don't think that roundabouts are suitable at either of those intersections for those reasons.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the bus lane.
I'm not talking long term. Yeah, I think, excuse me, Howard's Drive, I think all the experts are agreed, signals are it. And
Yep.
from what you're saying, NZUP Stage 1 project saying, yes, signals. So I think that concern that you've just raised is probably addressed. What I'm trying to understand is, once again, in general terms, at the full development, I understand your position around not having a roundabout at Stalker Road.
Yep.
What I'm trying to understand is, this variation is going to be developed over years, realistically.
Yep.
Is it reasonable to say you can't do anything at the east end if something at the west end that requires, at the moment, that Stalker Road be signalised hasn't happened yet? Is there a way around it? And realistically, playing devil's advocate a bit here, if you're here as an expert at the request of Waka Pūtahi, do we actually care, from your perspective, if we're creating extra queues into Shotover Country Estate or up Stalker Road to the north, lower Shotover Road, whichever one it is? From Waka Pūtahi's perspective, if they get caught up, does it matter?
Well, once again, I won't speak for them. I'll just provide my views. The signalisation of Stalker Road, I think, well, let's step back a bit. I'm sure there will be people that would care about worsening performance of that intersection.
I'm sure there will be.
There will be a lot of people that would be very upset about that.
Just
I think
on that one, would that then encourage some people onto buses? Because like in Wellington, you have bus lanes that bring you right up to roundabouts. And so you're sitting in your car, the bus goes up the inside of you and pops out.
Yep.
And you think, oh, if I was on that bus, I would have missed this queue.
Yep.
Is there some benefit in that?
I
as
think-
an interim step, not
I
as
think
the
there's,
long term?
yeah, absolutely. There's a huge benefit, and that's what we're trying to achieve here. Is to if you have people sitting in their cars frustrated, and they see the bus flying past, it's like, hey, I might try that tomorrow. That's the principle behind providing the infrastructure to be able to support that mode shift. And look, I think it'll be effective. To what extent? It's hard to tell. We've modelled it through the bespoke model, so we've had a bit of a look at that. I'm not sure where that leaves you with that infrastructure in place. I'm not sure where that leaves you with respect to what becomes then the receiving environment and the permitted baseline for an assessment of transport effects. So would you still then potentially have a worsening or exacerbation of that delay at Stalker Road? Because those same things I am concerned about, such as the right turners then creating more conflict and more delay for State Highway 6 westbound through traffic, for traffic trying to get out of Stalker Road. It's complex.
Yeah. So you're talking about the right turn holding up westbound State Highway 6 through traffic if it remains as a roundabout.
Correct.
Is that assuming that you have development at the western end occurring? Because the only real reason you're going to get a big increase in traffic, sort of doing that right turn, is if we've got development of things, sub-areas A, B. But if you develop those, they're required to do the signals.
Yeah, in the context of Stalker Road, yes. So, following your line of hypotheticals, if development were to occur in proximity of Howard's Drive, there is an intersection upgrade of whatever it ends up being there. You're then adding more traffic to the State Highway 6 westbound through movement, which then is going to further impact on Stalker Road traffic that just can't get out of Shotover country.
Okay.
So you've still got effects. That wouldn't be a problem. Well, it would be less of a problem if you had, yes, the bus lane in place, and yes, if you had the signalisation of Stalker Road. For me, I think what's really important here is that we think about this as a corridor and we make sure that we have sufficient comfort that we're not going to have a step change worsening of the existing congestion that's out there. And so what I've tried to achieve through my assessment in the summary table, including that table 2, is to get to that point where you have got comfort that you're not going to end up with a worse outcome than what's there at the moment, with appropriate infrastructure in place and that being linked to the sequencing of development.
Thank you. That was all my questions.
You're welcome.
Just might follow up with that. I'm aware, and no doubt you'll know a lot more about this than me, but with some councils, they want a level of congestion. And you were discussing that with Judith there, because that level of congestion helps the PT element. And
Yep.
I've been in RM processes where councils have opposed enabling traffic flow so that they can disable it but encourage PT. So the key thing's the timing of that Stalker Road intersection and whether it needs to go first before the latter, the far end developments if it's staged that way. And it's just your view that, and we've had discussions about congestion timing, 6 minutes, whatever.
Yeah.
There's a lot worse in Auckland, there's a lot worse in Wellington, there's a lot worse everywhere, not downplaying it for the people in it. It's frustrating and annoying.
Yeah.
But is it so important that that Stalker Road goes first, in your view? Or could it wait for the closer intersections, the concern you've got about cars coming out of Ladies Mile getting control? But it won't be that if it starts at the east, because the western isn't developed. So you'd have Shotover country coming through, but a Shotover road or whatever it's called from the north. But, sorry, long question. But
It's all right.
is it that fundamentally important, or actually could it wait in time because you develop at the east, there's going to be queues, but your bus lane goes up, pops out at the end, and people at the east think, well, maybe I should be on the bus.
Yeah. Congestion, yeah, you're absolutely right. Congestion can be a great travel demand management measure. If you don't address it, people are going to make some other choices. In the context of this network, I'd say it is important, and the reason why is that it's highly geographically constrained. So take, for example, a scenario where somebody needed to get to the hospital or an emergency vehicle needed to get through. Obviously, there's implications as well for commercial vehicles that are just trying to get their job done. If someone really had to get through and they couldn't, then they could head all the way around Mulligan's Road through Arthur's Point. That's an awful long way. So, for me, the entire network is actually a very sensitive one, and it's very sensitive to that congestion. Congestion's also not a linear thing. So if you add 10% of traffic, you're not adding 10% to the congestion. There's an exponential curve there, and we're a long way up that curve already with the sorts of delays and what you see out there in the morning peak on the east and evening peak on the west. So my view is that the responsible thing to do is to actually upgrade that intersection, because at the moment it is falling over, and a small increment in traffic will actually result in quite a substantial continued deterioration from what it is today.
I don't think anyone's arguing that it needs to be upgraded per se. It's more the timing of it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think you've called it aspirational mode shift with an exclamation mark. Isn't it to achieve that aspirational mode shift starting early, if it was to develop at the east first, actually requiring something aspirational? So it's requiring, yes, you might be going up that congestion curve, but that might be from the start, there's talk about behaviour change and the need to change behaviours.
Yeah.
Could that assist, or it's
yeah,
solely
yeah.
on the timing of it rather than whether it's needed?
Yeah.
Can I, oh, sorry.
You'll do it more eloquently.
Can I just ask a follow-up question?
Oh, okay, we'll do that one first.
Do that
then.
one and then ask.
Okay. I think it would be pragmatic to put the bus lane in place before the intersection upgrade for those reasons. I think that's really, really important. But this is a package. There's no silver bullet, or if you like, in terms of solving the congestion. I think this, unfortunately, this corridor is always going to have congestion, even with these measures in place. And a big part of that is the fact that you have got one bridge across the Shotover River there with one lane in each direction. So there is going to be a bottleneck. The principle of the signals is very much about being able to manage that. There's also the pedestrian movement. That's really, really important. It's hostile to get across there at the moment, unless you had a grade separated facility. So yeah, I'm kind of stepping back and going, what does this actually need to look like before you've got substantial development? I'm not going to argue that a very small amount of development is going to change the world, but I want to be comfortable that the steps are in place, that the infrastructure is being planned and delivered in a timely fashion to be able to manage impacts as the development comes on board.
So my follow-up question, and this comes out of my own experience sitting on your side of the table, 2 recent hearings where we had a similar situation in principle where there is significant constraint on the network, an intersection within Waka Kotahi's jurisdiction that is not working, and the desire by Waka Kotahi for somebody else to essentially fix an existing problem. There is case law. I can't remember which case. I'm sure David will be able to supply it in an aside, but there is case law that basically says that's not on. So once again, just testing, playing devil's advocate a little, because we're trying to tease information out to enable us to make a good and reasoned decision.
Yep.
If the intersection is that bad already, the congestion is that bad already, the geographic constraint doesn't change whether Ladies Mile goes ahead or not, should Waka Kotahi be upgrading this intersection to signals as part of the NZ Up project, or is it actually a developer problem?
That's a very good question.
That's why I asked it.
And it may be a question better put to Waka Kotahi themselves, but look, from my perspective in terms of my RMA experience, my view is that we know how it's operating at the moment. That gives us somewhat of a baseline. If development applications come in, which are going to create, are going to worsen or exacerbate that, then that's something that needs to be considered in the context of that particular development.
Nicely dodged.
Thank you.
Now, I'll stop that line of questions so that I had, so the panel can ask questions. Hoani, do you have any?
No, I've got that.
Yep, I've got more, but we'll come back to mine at the end.
Certainly.
Mine are on a different tab, so maybe we want to
Um,
cover in.
Ian?
Okay.
Yep.
I'll just start with that last one finished off.
Sure.
I appreciate, and you've said several times, you're not Waka Kotahi, and that's understood. I'll ask the question you were asked in a slightly different way. Are there any technical or traffic engineering impediments that would stop Waka Kotahi from undertaking improvements at various intersections, additional bridges, etc., if it was so minded?
Okay. Excellent question. I have some history with transport planning within the Queenstown Lakes District, in particular having led the Integrated Transport Program business case and then been the modelling lead on the transport business cases more recently. Through that process, we've developed, I guess, a strategy for transport planning in terms of how that's managed. And look, a big part of this is looking at the feasibility and viability of what can actually be achieved. Some of our staff went out on State Highway 6A, so between Queenstown and Frankton, and had a look at that corridor in detail to see if there was any way that a full four laning for traffic could be achieved. And I understand that the answer to that was no. It's basically, it's completely infeasible in terms of the topography and
Between
landholdings.
what points?
Sorry, that's between Queenstown and Frankton. So I'm off on a little bit of a tangent already, but that's it's important to where I'm heading with this.
Okay.
So that is a constraint.
Yep.
Now, in all the years that I've been doing transport planning and modelling here, I have never looked at a scenario where there's been a 4-lane bridge across the Shotover River in proximity to Ladies Mile. And one of the reasons for that is that if you 4-lane that and then all of a sudden you've gone from having what's currently it's about 24,000 vehicles a day on there, out to 45,000 vehicles a day, which is what a 4-lane divided carriageway corridor could hold, what's going to happen downstream? So what's going to happen at those intersections in Frankton, and then what's that going to do to State Highway 6A? So the big constraint, in my view, and from my experience, is very much State Highway 6A, which is a critical link in the network. And once again, it's the only link unless you go all the way around Arthur's Point. And if there was just continued infrastructure being invested in elsewhere, then that's going to create unsolvable problems elsewhere on the network. With respect to looking at things at an intersection level, then my answer to your question is, yeah, that's fine. Yes, you can pop signals there. You could start designing it tomorrow. That's not a problem. But the fundamental problem is 6A, and then having a 2-lane bridge across the Shotover and a 2-lane bridge across the Kawerau Falls Bridge, which has recently been built, they provide ways of protecting that wider network from being even more overwhelmed than it is today, and not having a solution in the toolkit that you can pull out.
Okay, so in summary, yes, there are fixed network constraints that need to be understood and set a ceiling, whatever that is, at what can be done. And fair summary?
And can't be engineered around,
Can't
in
be
my
engineered around.
understanding.
Very good.
Yes, yep.
I can understand the idea with a signalised intersection, say Stalker Road. Bus comes along on the bus lane. When the signal is red, gets to the front of the queue, maybe gets a little bus advance and sneaks off. But the light's not going to be red every time a bus turns up, I'm assuming. Most of the time it might be green. In fact, it might be managed to maximise the green wave during peak hours. And I'm trying to understand how the bus gets in advance when the intersection is in its green phase and there's lots and lots of cars around. Does that mean the bus sometimes gets caught in the snarl up, but overall there'll be an aggregate benefit for enough buses that it counts, or does how do you see it actually operating?
For me, the bus priority would have to extend to the west of the intersection.
Yeah.
It wouldn't just get to the intersection, then all of a sudden they're caught up in the westbound
So
carnage.
it gets through the intersection and then it just effectively takes it straight to the merge point, does it? And it just...
I think that I haven't, I will acknowledge I haven't seen any particular designs around.
And at this point, it's more conceptually understanding how it would work.
Yeah. For me, you would need to end up with a situation as close as possible to the Shotover Bridge, westbound, such that general traffic has already merged
Yep.
into one lane, and then the bus space
Okay.
can come in there. That for me would be the best outcome in
Yep.
terms of bus priority and making it as attractive as possible to be able to achieve mode shift
Okay,
aspirations.
attractive as possible. Right, so I want to then just combine that answer with the line of questioning from the chair about sometimes does congestion help that. If we were talking just generally about encouraging passenger transport use for some climate change, greenhouse gas, it's the right thing to do issue, that's one level. But the evidence, as I understand it, is that unless the district makes unprecedented and serious mode shift changes in the next couple of decades, then there's going to be serious network consequences.
Agree.
At what point, instead of a second bridge being about cars, is a bridge for buses and cyclists and pedestrians actually the most appropriate long-term solution to achieve unprecedented ambitious mode shifts, and that might actually need serious vehicular congestion to create an unambiguous, the time I have to walk to my bus stop that I don't have to do in my car, the time I have to walk from the bus stop to my place of work that I, certainly depending on where you work, you might not need to, you might have a car there too.
Yep.
You know, those are delays that offset the time saving that you might get at some key intersections on the bus.
Yep. Yep.
And so I'm trying to understand, if we're being told this is such a serious issue, we must achieve these mode shifts, they're unprecedented, ambitious, exclamation mark.
Yep. Yep.
At what point is it not good enough to just say Waka Pūtahi doesn't need to come to the party with some serious infrastructure upgrades too?
Yep.
That's something
Yep.
I'm really interested in understanding. And
Okay.
I'll tell you why, and I'll come to it soon. One of the downsides of planning methods that put the onus of network management onto landowners by way of constant monitoring and traffic assessments that let developers be told no, is that it actually says infrastructure providers get a little more time to forestall spending money, because they can effectively just keep turning the tap off at one end.
Yep.
And that might not be the right overall outcome. So that's the context for the question, just so you know where I'm coming from.
Yeah, certainly. There will come a point in time, and I think this was certainly signalled in the transport business cases and the prior integrated transport PBC I was involved in, where mass rapid transit is actually required. And mass rapid transit is, it's not bus lanes, it's that next level that you're
Yep.
talking about.
Yep.
So it is potentially a two-lane bridge that's provided for public transport, and look, you can bolt walking and cycling onto that. That's pragmatic to do, and helps support those sorts of goals. And I think that's it's in my view somewhere in Queenstown's future. It's probably a long way out. It takes a heck of a lot of planning. It takes a heck of a lot of money, but that is let's just say. Incoming government policy aside, because we haven't seen their GPS, but that's kind of the direction that
Okay.
we have been heading in, is that you're less likely to get those wholesale infrastructure projects just to be able to get more cars on the network, and it's more likely to be directed at public transport. My review of the Transport for the Future document, which we're not talking about MRT being anywhere in the next 3 years, but there's still that continued focus on public transport. And there's a continued focus on providing choice to an extent. So, look, I agree with you. It's somewhere, but it takes an awful lot of planning. It's not around the corner.
No, understood. Look, a couple of last questions, and I'll pick up a theme that Judith also put to you about the monitoring ITA requirements, etc.
Sure.
There's two things I don't quite, in my head, have clear about how such a method could work. First of those is, well, I'll start with a general proposition. Do you accept that the zone isn't just going to be built like magic beans? It might take 30 years or 20 years to actually get everything that's talked about in the plan change built?
Oh, 100% agree.
Yep. Okay. So over that time, we don't have the capability to stop Cromwell building 500 houses for Christchurch commuters outside of the district, and I'm already aware of employees in this district that commute from outside of the district.
Correct.
We don't know what might happen with the next iteration of what we saw in the last decade about special housing areas and other initiatives to get housing happening that might also have serious consequences for traffic using the public highway. So when you talk about monitoring over time and cumulative effects, are we only talking about the situation of the current highway situation benchmark today and the development within the whole of the Ladies Mile proposed zone we're looking at together, and only that? Or do you envisage a scenario where development in Ladies Mile might start getting refused because development somewhere else is coming along after the fact and taking up more capacity?
So if I'm approached to do an integrated transport assessment for a development site, I will look out there and see what's actually happening today. I won't be looking back to see how things
Yep.
were looking when
Yep.
the plan change was
Yeah,
considered, approved,
yeah,
so on and so forth. But if I were in a situation where I had some good, rich data that had been collected, often we aren't as traffic engineers. We can pick up some traffic counts, we can go out and count traffic ourselves, we can look at queue lengths, that sort of thing. But getting hold of information about walking and cycling, getting hold of information relating to public transport, really important contextual information as we look to have better integrated planning
Yes.
outcomes, would be a real bonus as a practitioner. So that's what I am
okay. So
seeking.
you're coming
is-
at it very much from the how to get the best data,
Yep.
how to make the right decisions.
Yep.
I'm asking a question slightly higher, which I would imagine as an engineer involved in these things you might have a view on, and you might wish to put it onto someone else, is at a certain point in time, does it become unreasonable to make the people trying to live in Ladies Mile responsible for cycling, walking and busing on the highway? There's a really weird circle that could happen where if we agreed with you and created a mechanism whereby further development of the zone could be stopped because the traffic situation's got so much worse,
Yeah.
but it's actually getting worse because development in less suitable, less desirable, less strategic locations is happening in an unrestricted way, loading up the traffic that almost stops Ladies Mile getting able to be built,
Yeah.
which might backfire the whole idea of getting this dense, walkable, cyclable, busable community happening. Do you understand? It's
Yeah, yeah.
It's that gnarly
Yeah.
midway point.
Yeah, well, we work within the confines of the RMA and how we look at
Okay.
effects and all that sort of thing. So,
Okay.
you know, it may be different in the future, obviously, with,
Yeah, okay.
with RMA reform, but that's where it is. Look, I don't think it's a perfect system that we're working in for that particular reason, in that you could end up with something which isn't entirely fair on all parties. Look, from my perspective, there's the opportunity here to be able to get some improved outcomes in terms of, I'm looking at this as a package and going, hey, you put some schools there, look, that's heading in the right direction.
Yeah, sure.
You put a commercial centre, you're heading in the right direction. You put the public transport infrastructure in, you're heading in the right direction. You throw 2,000 households out there tomorrow, you're not.
Yeah.
I think that the planning provisions around this are going to be really important to make sure that we protect ourselves from really poor outcomes, acknowledging the constraints on the network.
Okay. The last question on the same theme is the overtime factor, and I mean I've seen instances where a bit of a commercial centre might develop, but then the rest of it might not come along until 1,000 houses come, because there's an interdependency between the two, and so it might be that for a period of 10 or more years there's lots more driving happening out of the zone than might be expected in the long term, just because of where it's at.
Yep.
With the various thresholds of the different pieces coming together. And so then to have an ongoing sequence of assessment and ITA, we need to then have a sense of understanding what it is we should actually be expecting. at
Yep.
different timeframes, because it's not necessarily just going to be a linear. All the buses might not come on the first 20 houses. They might not come until the last 20.
Yep,
And
yep.
so in my head, I'm trying to think through not the merit of your idea, the mechanics of how we could actually do it. And,
Yep,
and it
yep.
seems to me, and if I'm wrong, in the first instance, let me know, we would need to have a pretty clear understanding of how it is we actually thought this might come about over
Yep,
3 yearly
yep.
increments, 5. Is that, would we need that kind of data to do?
I'd love to have that as somebody considering it. There aren't staging provisions as such. Now, it's really difficult, I can understand, to influence what's going to happen in terms of commercial development when retailers, for example, need some critical mass to be able to make sure that they can make some money. I think the schools are really fundamental to this.
We've
Absolutely
talked about
fundamental.
to other witnesses should one of those first staging requirements, and you're focused on traffic upgrades. We have put to other witnesses should some committed decision from the Ministry of Education on the schools, not necessarily like opening ribbon cutting,
Yeah.
but should some commitment to at least one of those also be an upfront requirement, at least for houses. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It'd be helpful. I'm not sure whether that's something the Ministry of Education would be prepared to do.
Well, it might just be a staging trigger that no one can do anything until it happens, when it happens, how it happens. In the same way,
Yeah.
we can't force Pūtahi to put signals in or someone to put a bus lane in either.
Yeah, I guess that is much the same. I mean, it'd be unfortunate to go through a plan change process where the developers can't actually do anything because they're completely stymied. So it's a very sensitive area, in my view, to go down that pathway.
Schools.
But I would, in terms of saying there must be a school.
But not traffic.
We're doing that for the traffic.
I mean,
Sorry?
surely you'd
Sorry?
accept we're already in the hands of when other agencies decide to do any of the upgrades we've been given. Funding could be pulled tomorrow. So at a certain
I see
point,
where
we
you-
have
yeah,
to trust
yeah.
that these things will be done, and if it's appropriate that landowners just need to wait. Surely it's good for the goose, good for the gander, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I can't speak to how Ministry of Education
Yes,
work.
it's whether they
I
might
can
like it or
I
not.
can speak from a practitioner's perspective in terms of how Pūtahi work, and I know that if there was more developer pressure, it helps with being able to prioritise
Okay.
investments. So that's actually quite useful. But I'm not a schools guy, so I can't say
But
that
putting-
Ministry of
putting
Education
aside-
would be ready
putting
to cut the
aside-
ribbon.
Putting aside whether the NOE might like it and putting aside whether landowners might like it,
Yeah.
as a traffic expert
Yep.
who's considered all these issues,
Certainly am.
who's aware of all the sensitivities on the network,
Yep.
who's already recommended a series of triggers and thresholds that should be achieved, coordinated with development.
Yep.
You've mentioned in two answers, schools have an important part to play.
Yes.
As a practitioner, would there be merit in, however it's done,
Yep.
schools or schooling being added to that list of thresholds and triggers and staging?
100%, but it
Yep.
has to be pragmatic.
Very good, very good. Well, we got there. And again, really apologise if some of the questions made you feel you were being asked to speak for Waka Kotahi or MOE. That's not the intent. It might just be clumsy
Yep,
calibration
yep.
of words.
Yeah, I just don't want to end up with an outcome here which is completely unhelpful to all parties. So that was my concern in terms of answering those questions. Yeah, cheers. Yeah, thank you.
Just a quick follow-up on that, because Mr Shields sort of got to the same position in terms of the importance of the schools.
Okay, yep.
Given the 19-20% traffic flows, I think, over the bridge. Are the two schools equal? I understand there's a primary school already down in Shotover country, and I know there'll be capacity issues, but is it more focused on one of the schools, like the college, or would you do both if you were minded to look at either? Do you know the traffic?
Yeah,
My understanding from what I've read as a layperson is the college and the movement to the college is quite a significant factor there.
yes.
Would you see a difference between a potential new college or a potential new primary school, or you could tie it to both?
Yeah, it's obviously something I haven't assessed as such. I'm inclined to say both, but potential. Yeah, maybe more the college, but I don't have any idea whether the primary school is currently at capacity. If it is, I'd say the primary school, but I just don't have that information. Sorry,
No,
to make
thank
that
you.
determination.
Thank you.
Follow on that. I come from a rural area where I have a school bus that takes used to take my kids to school. And there were some points over the last week where we've discussed, well, if there was a school bus doing a circuit, like an orbit through there, so, and getting them to a school, would that significantly change use of private vehicles to get their one child, when you can get 20 to 40 to school in a single vehicle?
I think that'd be very helpful. People will use public transport, well, school buses. It'll suit some people, particularly if there aren't any after-school commitments, for example. Yeah, I'd be a fan of that. I think that'd be very helpful. It's all part of that whole of system improving, providing more travel choice, and getting better outcomes. So that'd be great.
And so it's kind of seeing a picture of like a ring road that runs through the zone
Mm-hmm.
that can service those schools.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there are, I haven't looked at this for several years, so it may have changed, but I know that there are quite strict criteria with the Ministry of Education around school travel assistance and providing for school buses. So if you're close to a public transport service, sorry.
It may be something the school that MOE needs to look at. So MOE
Yep.
to achieve it in this location.
Mm.
We need to change the model.
Yep.
Students don't need to be whatever the appropriate distance from school is to get a free bus service.
Yeah, and some private schools put on their own bus services. So, yeah, there are solutions there for the brave. Yeah,
Thanks.
you're welcome.
Gillian?
Thanks, Mr. Smith. My interest is slightly different, and it may be off your area of expertise, so please tell me if that's the case.
Yeah, sure.
One of the things we've been focusing on in the infrastructure space is actually around stormwater. So State Highway 6 currently creates effectively a dam through that area, so that water on the northern side is something that's been a focus for how we manage that, and we've been looking at putting the 1% AEP to ground, so the 1 in 100 year. At the moment, my understanding and my observation is that water just runs off State Highway to ground, just to land. Curious with the curb and channel. So when there is a curb and channel on the State Highway, in your experience, is that, if you know the answer to this, is that when Waka Pūtahi then puts in more formal stormwater management systems?
I think that's a question that might have to be directed back to Waka Pūtahi. Sorry.
Okay,
It's
absolutely
outside of my
fine.
area, but thank you.
It was worth asking, thank you.
Would you like me to direct that back to
That would be
the
helpful.
client team?
Actually, there's probably two questions in there. If there are upgrades happening on the State Highway, whether there is any proposal to do more than current in stormwater management in terms of both volume and quality.
Okay.
The natural drainage is towards Lake Hayes, which is an outstanding water body, and it's a water body we're trying to protect the water quality of, and also there's a regionally significant, or a proposed regionally significant wetland around the margin of Lake Hayes as well.
Okay.
So if you could ask those questions around both volume and quality, would be great.
Okay. In terms of what experience I do have, I haven't been involved in any design work for Waka Pūtahi, but for other road controlling authorities, for local authorities. Through the detailed design process, we do actually work very closely with civil engineers to ensure that there is appropriate stormwater provision through that process. But that's about as far as my involvement goes. I don't really get into the weeds of it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just a couple of last ones from me.
Yeah, sure.
We heard, and I'm just making sure that I get it right, I think that the notice of requirement, and you mentioned things beyond appeals, looking to the west of the Shotover Bridge, to that State Highway 6A intersection area, that there's been a designation now for the bus lanes to go through. Are you aware of that, or that any? You mentioned designations and things,
Yeah,
and I was just wondering, in appeal periods,
Yeah.
and I was just wondering, is that to allow a wider corridor to go through for the bus lanes?
Yeah, I'll have to come back to you on that so I can provide a specific answer around the scope of that. One question I did ask when I engaged with Mr. Sizemore this morning was relating to the notice of requirement in Howard's Drive and whether that was big enough such that that could be delivered as a set of signals as opposed to a roundabout if that were the right thing to do. So that's yes, but not so sure about the 6A side of things.
And the one other one, just sticking to the western side, is the way I'd envisaged it from your evidence and Mr. Shields was if you're heading west from Ladies Mile, you get held up at the Stalker Road sort of roundabout the choke point through there, merge onto the bridge, but then from the delay timings once you're over the bridge it seems to flow reasonably well. And this is in the morning peak.
Yes, yeah.
But conversely, on the west side, when you're heading home from work in the evening peak, so you're driving east, that's when the delays occur, heading out on the other side of the bridge through the intersections. And I just wondered if you need both side bus lanes done first, or whether the key bus lane to get in is just the heading east PM peak bus lane.
Yeah, sure. So perhaps the most helpful thing to address that is in my primary evidence I included an appendix which presented some TomTom analytics data relating to travel times. And what we found on the State Highway 6 corridor, westbound, so I'm talking about from the eastern end of the planned variation site all the way through to the BP roundabout, westbound 90% of the delay happened to the east, 10% on the west. So on that basis, I'm less precious about that westbound bus lane on the west, heading towards BP. Having said that, when I have driven it during the morning peak, I have found that there's a bit of snarling up around Grants Road, not so much Hawthorne Drive, but the conflicts at Grants Road do create some delay there, and 6A is obviously a bit of a mess. And then conversely, in the evening peak, eastbound, 90% of the delay occurs on the west, so that bus lane is a essential piece of infrastructure in my mind, and then 10% on the east.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any other
You're most welcome.
questions for Mr. Smith? Thank you very much for coming in. I know at one stage there was some correspondence about whether you could attend virtually, etc.
I'm more than happy to be here.
It's being here in person is a lot more helpful to the panel, so thank you very much for sorting that one out.
Yep.
And also thank you very much for all the work you've done with Mr. Shields, who I suspect's been very busy with the questions, and with the questions that you've taken notes down from today.
Yes.
But also that little bit you read.
Yep.
If you could please just email is fine,
Okay.
those through to the hearings administrator, and then we can have that, and the council can have that, and everyone can look at it.
Yep.
But thank you very much for all of the effort.
Oh,
that
you're
you've put in.
most welcome. What time frame would you like me to turn that around in?
If possible by Friday next week, please.
Oh, no problem.
If it's sooner, that would be, give the council more time to ponder and think about it.
Yep, certainly.
But it depends how much actually there is there.
Yep, it shouldn't be too bad. Yep.
Cool. Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're most welcome.
So we'll adjourn now until Monday morning. I think we start at 11 on Monday morning, so we'll be underway then. We will have, as we alluded to earlier, a site visit soon to Cocoa Ridge, and then we'll be back 11 a.m. on Monday morning. So thank you all. Have a great weekend.
To go back to